So I guess I'm out of the book club.
Howdy, everyone. You're watching Unsafe Space. You're watching Book Club with me, Carter Laren, and our host today, Richard Petz. Say hi, Richard. You're on.
Hi, everybody. I apologize for the accent. People keep telling me I still have an accent, which I deny. But
you do, but it's okay. Americans like the British accent. It's all good.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll see how it goes. If you can't understand what I'm saying, just make that clear, and I'll try to tidy up my speech.
Yeah, you just have to throw in some American colloquialisms, and then you'll fool everyone.
Yeah, right.
There you go. Anyway, if you are joining us, this is the book club discussion for The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo by Stieg Larsson, and Richard will be hosting. I'm just here to kick it off and make a couple announcements. One is the next book after this one will be National Divorce, The Peaceful Solution to Irreconcilable Differences. That will be on January 8th. The book is by Tom Woods, and the host will be Keith Bissett, who's also going to join us for the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo discussion today. So he can talk more about that. And the book after that will be a book called Light by M. John Harrison, which is a science fiction book. And I'm not sure I'm supposed to use the person's name who's hosting. I don't know how he went. Hooligan, if you're in Discord, his name is Hooligan. His handle's Hooligan. I'm not sure what name he wants to go by on air, so I won't dox him, but he'll be hosting that, and that's on February 5th of next year. So those are the two books to get in your queue and start reading if you want. I don't think there's any other announcements other than like, follow, share, go to unsafespace.com, sign up for the abstract, which comes out every Saturday and gives you summary of the week's news, all that kind of stuff. I don't think there's many more announcements to make, so I'm going to let Richard take over, and then I'm going to ask Alex and Keith, who are in the background, when Richard is done with his intro, go ahead and add yourselves back in, because I don't think Richard can do that. So there we go. Richard, take it away.
Thanks, Carter. Okay, so today's book club book is The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. This was a book written by Stieg Larsson, and it's the first book in a 3-book series, which I believe now has been expanded to, I'm not sure, 5 or 6 books, but the first 3 were written by himself. This book was first published in 2005 in Swedish, and then it was subsequently translated and released in 2008 in the UK under the title The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. But the original book in Swedish was Men Who Hate Women, for those of you who are unaware of that. Stieg was born in 1954 and died 50 years later in 2004. So he was pretty young when he died from a heart attack, I believe. And the other 2 books that are part of this series are The Girl Who Played with Fire, which was released in 2006, and The Girl Who Kicked the Hornet's Nest, which was released in 2009. And together they make up a pretty good trilogy, but this book is the one we're focused on today. And it's a good read, and it covers a lot of different subjects. I suppose the one in particular is violence against women. And throughout the book, there are 4 parts to the book, and then each part has subsequent chapters. But the heading for each part features a statistic drawn from Swedish I'm not sure the exact data source, but around statistics around the subject of sexual violence and violence against women. So, yeah. Okay, so if anybody has any, if you guys anybody want to join and have some discussion around the book, that would be great. I would love to have a discussion. I don't want to be here just myself talking about the book. So anyway, yeah, what do you guys think? Well, anything to say? Oops.
Hi. Hold on. I'm getting feedback.
I've got a quick question. Maybe you can just, for people who don't know this book, Richard, can you talk about so violence against women is like a major subject, a major theme in the book. Can you talk about why, like, why you chose it from that? Like, was that related to your choice? Like, what were the reasons that you chose this book and thought that this is a really good book that people should be reading?
Yeah. Okay. So, according to Stieg's partner, I think at the age of 14, he was exposed to his friends gang raping a girl. And I believe that left a kind of a devastating mark on his psyche because he didn't step in to try to defend her. And so that, and I think for myself, I never experienced that as a child, but at quite a young age, I do remember being around, I think I was probably like around 13 years old, 12 maybe. I just been sent to secondary school in England, which is sort of like high school. And we were out in this kind of backfield. And a bunch of the other guys, or the other boys, were torturing a hedgehog. Now, it sounds ridiculous, right? But I couldn't understand it. I couldn't relate to it at all. I found it kind of repulsive, and that left a mark on me too. Like, what kind of, why are they doing this, and how are they deriving such seeming pleasure out of torturing a defenseless animal? So, the two experiences, I suppose, resonate with me in the sense that there are different kinds of people out there. And there does seem to be a kind of delineating line running through psychology that separates people one side or the other. Like, some people just seem to derive pleasure. I suppose it's some sort of sadistic streak, and other people don't. And that's kind of, I feel that part of psychology expands across society into other domains, and produces all kinds of different kinds of predators. And so this book focuses on sort of like more like the predatory animus of men against women, but there are certainly other kinds of predators, both across both sexes, I believe. So yeah, that's where my interest in the book, and then the story's great as well, and I feel like he kind of builds up a pretty good story around that. The protagonist in the book is a girl, a young woman who's suffered her own violence against her, and she's a bit of an outcast in society, right? She doesn't trust authorities with good reason, and so she's this sort of outcast, and she gets mad. The story brings her and this journalist together in an unlikely scenario, and the book kind of takes off from there, right? So
I like that whole what you just brought up, and I see that as kind of the underlying theme. So violence against women, by evil people, like that exists, right? We all have to live with that as a fact, and you can expand that. It's not just women; it's all forms of evil people, and you have to live with it. And I love the contrast because the book has these major characters that have different ways of solving it. So like the journalist, his method is to free speech. Like he's just going to tell everybody, here's what's happening. Even if he gets put in jail, that's his method. The police essentially do nothing, which is kind of expand that the government's not going to help. And then Elizabeth is like, I'm going to take care of this on my own and no one is even going to know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And that's the end. Like that's the hero. The end of the book hero is actually Elizabeth, and I'm kind of in that camp myself. So I love the whole theory.
Yeah. I mean, I find it actually, I mean, I first read the book, I don't know, like a decade ago or something like that. And then maybe a little bit longer than that. And I've read it a number of times since. And now it's, when I first read it, it was, just as kind of a novel and an interesting story. But now I see it more and more relatable to what's actually happening broadly in civilization. And so I feel like in some sense it's quite kind of prescient, I guess, to what's going on today. Even when you take a look at like how just thinking about Julian Assange, for example, just to use him as an example, because he's kind of in the news and stuff, or well known perhaps. And it's interesting how people's reaction to him it seems pretty divided cleanly between those who think of him as, I don't know, use the word hero, but let's just use that word for argument's sake, and those who feel like he should be left to rot in a jail somewhere, right? And it doesn't seem to be a lot of people who most people I speak to kind of fall one way or the other, right? That's if they know of him at all, and if they don't, they think of him, I don't know.
He is a hero to people who believe in freedom of speech and believe in exposing illegal, immoral, evil actions of my government. If you want to call it that. I didn't pick it, so I hesitate to use the word "my," but American citizens. I'm a Florida citizen, but he exposed that. What he said is true, as best. Like the government's not even denying that it's true.
Yeah.
That isn't the reason they want to either put him in jail for life, extradite him, put him in jail for life, or give him the death penalty. Like that's the two options. And he's languishing. Who knows what's going to happen? But that's a journalist. So yeah, I see that analogy. I didn't think of that one, but it's a perfect analogy for the guy going to jail for an article.
Yeah. Or even or Russell Brick, rotting in jail kind of thing, right? I mean, whether it's a conflation of crime. For me, that's a conflation of things put together to make a case publicly, to get the public support, right? But what he did was, whether you agree on people taking drugs or not,
modern day update of this would be that the journalists for exposing these crimes would get trapped in Moscow by the CIA and FBI and have to seek Russian citizenship. That could be the subject line. Actually wouldn't change the book any. And it would all take place in Moscow. Because Elizabeth, I'm just going through this, but the scenario is like Elizabeth would have to go to Moscow with the journalists and do all her work from there. And as long as she had good internet, it wouldn't matter at all. She'd be fine. Yeah. Maybe better. Might be better off there.
Well, and the thing is, though, is that both Russia and Sweden have extreme problems with abuse of women that they are not handling well and have not handled well historically. Yeah. So, like, Sweden's in the top 10 for rape rates in the world, which is insane because a lot of people think of Sweden as like part of this developed world, country but it's right up there with like, some African countries. And it's like, that's pretty horrible.
Yeah.
You're not fixing this problem, and it doesn't seem like, even since this book came out, that it got any better. It seems like it actually got worse.
Right.
And then Russia has a big problem too with the same issue. They're not as bad as Sweden though, which is saying something.
Yeah, it is saying something. Yeah.
Russia's not going to be majority Muslim population within a decade or two. Like Sweden can no longer do anything about that. And to look at Sweden now compared to then, like they don't talk in this book about blonde, 100% Swedish heritage women dyeing their hair black to avoid rape. Like that isn't in this book.
Yeah.
And that's what's going on now.
I think he died before it started to become an issue in Sweden, but it's prevalent that even though rape is like such a big issue in Sweden now, and it's along ethnic lines, it shows you that a lot of the problem has to do with how their government handles sexual assault. If they had this problem previously, which they did.
Yeah. I mean,
Sweden.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I was going to say Sweden, one of the governments that stopped reporting ethnic origin in rape cases. Yeah. They're not quite to the level of, say, Canada, where I don't think they won't even report the sex in a rape case, right? Because they're not sure.
Yeah, but I totally agree, but I don't think this phenomenon, if you want to call it that, of violence towards women, is limited to one country or the other, right? I agree wholeheartedly that it's worse in some cultures than others, for sure. But unfortunately, it's not one of the things that is unique to one place or one culture, or you know what I mean? It seems to be more fundamental than that. And yeah, so I mean, I don't know if you're a Breaking Bad fan, but that's a show that I've watched a few times, and I think there's one episode in that where his character Mike, who's an ex-police officer, is kind of giving a little talk about half measures. I think actually that's the name of the episode in that show, where he describes, being called out on a domestic dispute. I know this is fictional and everything, but it's nevertheless still pretty relevant. I think he gets called out on a domestic, and they take the guy away, they put him in the tank overnight, and then blah blah blah. And it goes on, and then sure enough, the woman gets killed in the end, right? Where he had the opportunity to sort of kind of end this guy's life. And I think there's plenty of examples of that, even within our own Western. I know in England there was cases of women getting suffering from violence, and even in my partner's family, there's examples in that. I won't go into any depth on that or mention any names, but there were cases in that, and the family oftentimes hides, wants to hide it, all right, because of the shame, I suppose, that surrounds it. But it is something that is pervasive, I think, rather than limited to one country or another, or one culture or another. For some reason, I don't know. It's something I think it's something as a I don't even know what I should call myself. In fact, actually, a libertarian. I don't like any of these I don't like any of the labels anymore. But for myself, I take the non-violent approach to life. Across the board. Do you know what I mean? And this is not to say that I don't believe in self-defense. Of course, I completely and utterly believe in self-defense. But I would also believe that for women, I think women, if they were armed, would suffer much less in some of these countries, because at least they would have a means to defend themselves. And yet, this is sort of an issue that is like swept under the rug, right?
So I want to address something because there's someone in chat who's upset that we're saying that you're saying it's unique to Islam, and the violence, or that it's not unique to Islam, that it's in every culture. And I think that's history. I just want to. We have to be factual. It is in every culture. There is violence in every culture and has been throughout all of history. Now, currently, many Western nations have found ways and have done a good job to reduce that as a cultural norm and done a much better job. And Islam is by far the worst today culturally. So there is a difference in especially in fundamentalist Islamic cultures. That difference does exist, but it doesn't mean that the problem is unique. It's not like it only exists because of Islam. That's not true. Islam just has not curbed it in the way that the West has. The West has done a much better job of, well, I'll just use this word liberally, of liberalizing morals and saying, okay, well, we can't have slavery. We can't treat, we can't use violence against people. And so there's a difference between saying it's unique to Islam and it's more prominent in Islam. And no one is saying that it's not elsewhere. No one is saying it's only Islam, and no one is saying it's not elsewhere. It's just worse here. It's worse in Islam.
Yeah.
And I do want to say that while it's a small percentage of men who do rape women or physically abuse women, it's like and by the way, most Western countries do not have a method of protecting men from abusive or sexually assaultive women. There's no legal recourse in that regard at all for most men, which is a problem. That's actually where our problems are in the West for the most part when it comes to sexual violence. But it has a lot to do with how the society responds to sexual violence. Now, currently, the West is so afraid of being called racist that a lot of our governments are not responding to violence from Islam of women. And that is a huge problem. They are definitely like underdoing it. Like he said, they stopped tracking ethnicity of assailant in Sweden. That's huge. That is definitely cowardly. So like a lot of you don't get rid of or minimize violence against people without a societal response. And right now we're like the West is not societally responding to these Islamic attacks of their women, like unfortunately. And just like in the US, we're not responding to women's violence against men, so it's still ongoing. It's the same problem. If the society doesn't say it's wrong and punish the people who do it, it'll keep happening. And that's what we're seeing right now.
Yeah.
I mean, I wanted to comment too. After you said that, Carter, I read through that chat. It's just like insane groupthink. Nobody here ever said anything that all Muslims do this. From what I can tell, it's like a small percentage, as Alex said. And, my information includes like half a dozen family members I'm close to that lived in Tehran for 20 years, right before the revolution. So I don't know if this guy knows, like, say, Iran, a overwhelmingly majority Muslim country, what that was like before 53, before the CIA coup, then from 53 to 79, when the next coup happened, which was mostly, I don't want to get into that, but it's in response to American influence, and what Iran is like now. So, no, I know people well that lived the first half of their adult life in Tehran, and it's a beautiful city. The people that live there say the only city they knew of that was nicer than that is Paris. And it was perfectly fine for a 12-year-old to take the bus across town. So that's changed a lot. So no, it's not all Muslims. Unfortunately, it seems to be the percentage of Muslims moving to UK, Sweden, and other places are that type. And maybe it's 1%. I don't know. Maybe it's 5%. But I see the government's doing things to squash that getting out. I don't think it can happen in the U.S. I think the U.S. will do something. It's not going to happen in Russia. There's no way the Kremlin will let that happen in Russia. It's not happening in Japan. It's not happening in China. No way. But some European countries are allowing it. And I at least hope it can't happen here. I don't actually know. I know a lot of Muslims. I'm in the tech field. There's plenty of Muslims from Iran, Pakistan, Northern India. Like, they're all great people. And they're devout Muslims. So, no, it's not everybody. And nobody here said that. So, at some point, these people are a troll, in my opinion.
No, I think you're misinterpreting the messages. This person's not saying it's all Muslims. The person is saying that the fundamental problem is Islam, and I don't think the fundamental problem is Islam, because violence predates Islam and exists outside of Islam. However, I do think Islam is, in modern times, some interpretations, at least. I'm not a theologian, so I can't differentiate between, what different interpretations of the Quran are, but there are definitely various prevalent and prominent interpretations of Islam that are pretty vile with respect to ethics, and they are uniquely vile with respect to ethics compared to other major belief systems in the world. And
after the Enlightenment, I'll point out.
Right, and after the Enlightenment, and this person is correctly not complaining, but pointing out, like, look, this has been a real problem. Rotherham, Rockdale, Bradford, Manchester. There's been all of these attacks in the UK, but elsewhere, and it is the West's blindness to the philosophical condoning and even encouraging of this behavior that is the problem right now. Whether or not it's a problem with humans generally, philosophically, that's ground zero, at least in 2022.
And it does tie in with the book, so I'm glad we're talking about it, because I'm sure there's other people who will think that, and that's kind of the purpose of book club and public chat, is that we hear these different opinions. But I reject a lot of what he said because it's groupthink. That's basically why I reject that. Note in the book, I'll just point out, in the book, every single evil person in this book is white, Swedish, and Christian. So you got that.
Well, I mean, and like I said, this book predates the large amount of influx of Muslim immigrants to Sweden. So to me, a lot of this has to do with the fact that Sweden doesn't have a very good record of responding to sexual assault, which means it's ripe for an ethnic sexual violence problem. Because if it was already a problem that they were not responding well to sexual violence, then they're not going to respond well when it explodes because of an ethnic difference. So to me, it's sort of like, definitely there is a small percentage of men in every culture who are violent towards women. And you're not going to prevent that from happening, like, completely. They're just going to exist. It's how you respond to them. And one of the big problems, though, is that there is a philosophy within Islam that says it's okay to rape. So in some, not every, again, it's like Carter said, it's an interpretation that says it's okay to physically assault women of non-Muslim faith. And that's pretty harsh, but it's giving them a religious reason to be able to, a pass to be able to commit sexual violence. And see, that's the thing. A lot of predators, they will just use whatever. If society tells them, "Hey, it's okay, we're not going to punish you," and your religious faith tells you, "Yeah, it's not that big a deal," then they're going to take advantage of it. They're predators. Predators don't care about ethics beyond what society does or does not punish them for. So to me, I'm sort of like, unless you come down hard on it, you're not going to get it to at least stymie it. from exploding. And I think that's where the problem is again, societal reaction is not what it should be.
Yeah,
So,
I mean,
go ahead.
go. so yeah, I mean, like from a psychological viewpoint, this protection of predators in society is like I think like the heart of the problem. You know, we allow all kinds of predators to circulate, but the worst of them, ironically, we get, our attention gets pushed towards the most kind of, I don't know, cartoonish kind of predators out there. And in the meantime, we've got some really awful predators circulating at the top of the power chain, right? And we're too blindsided as a kind of a broad society to sort of like protect against that. And that's, it's not just a explicit violence. It's also this implicit predatory, I don't know, it's just like a psychopathy, I think, right? It's a deeply psychological flaw in the human species that allows for that to happen. And then, look where we're at right now. Like, we're just, doing our best to sort of, try to protect ourselves, really, never mind those around us. And yeah.
I agree. And at some point, I think we should get back to the book, because actually the book is about this, that
Yeah.
there are evil people in the world and you have to deal with them. However you want to deal with them. The book is actually about evil white Swedish Christians. But, the point that some Muslims, and everybody knows at this point, the percentage of Muslims that happen to be in Sweden right now, and probably in a lot of Muslim, maybe all Muslim countries, is higher than the percentage of Swedish people who do this. I think the reason that this is speculation, but when this problem started happening, I started researching Sweden, and I've written articles about it. Like I'm interested in that. Never been there, but it looks to me, as best I can tell right now, one of the reasons that the Swedish government doesn't know how to handle this is it wasn't a problem. and that's kind of the book, is like the most evil person raping, killing women, in the book is also like the president of one of the biggest companies in Sweden. Like, it's such an unusual thing that the police couldn't even track these murders over a 40, 50-year period all over the country, one every couple years. Like, they never saw the connection because it's so rare. Nobody found this until this guy starts this investigation. He digs it all up. It just wasn't a problem in Sweden. So I think we all probably recognize that. But at some point we should get back to the book. I think.
Yeah.
My opinion.
Yeah, for sure.
Can you guys say, what do you think the author says about the psychological motivation reason behind this? Because there's like a little bit of generational passing down of things. Like, does the author just treat this as, oh well, some people are like this and there's no explanation, or is there more nuance, and is there a reason there?
Well, yeah, I don't think he explicitly tries to explain the psychology behind these people, the predatory people, like, except in the case of the serial killer who finally gets exposed and dealt with in the story. He learned it off of his father, essentially. He was sort of mentored by his father, and they used, and in the process he was mentored to rape his sister. But he was a child himself at the time that he was being mentored, so that in and of itself is a real horror story. Like, if you can imagine, a young child being mentored by their father to become a serial killer, that's pretty horrific. But then there is a little bit of a sort of a description when the serial killer himself is sort of confessing to the journalist, the Blomkvist character, who's tied up at this point, and he's going to kill him. But he comes out and says, well, he actually takes pleasure in capturing these people and then making some kind of, he sees people as pathetic, mostly, this serial killer, and just takes pleasure in getting rid of them. He says that, so there is some kind of delving into the psychology there, I suppose. And but it's shocking in the sense that, if you're not one of these, it's hard to relate to these people, right? Because why do they derive pleasure from this kind of? But and I was just having a conversation this morning with my partner, and we were talking about the book and the story, and then we were trying to relate it to what's been happening during the last couple of years. And it's interesting because, like, we noticed that it seemed to bring out the opportunity for so many people to become like little tyrants. At the drop of a hat, people would just kind of like take on that role. And we noticed it quite a bit around, like, you go into a store, you're not standing in the right spot or whatever. And, some employee would come over and just be like, like, they're so happy that they're in this position now to tell someone else what they should and shouldn't do. And that that doesn't take much for people to come out of the woodwork like that and become like mini tyrants. And that was a little bit telling, I guess, right? Especially when you read back like books like, what happened prior to the Second World War, and how so many people went along with it and all this kind of stuff. But when you look around today, what's happened over the last couple of years, it's not really surprising at all, because people take the opportunity to lord it over somebody else, I guess, is the one way of putting it. So this aspect of humans exists widespread, I believe, right? And when it comes to like the tip of the spear with like these serial killers, that's the tip of the spear, but there is certainly a broader percentage of the population who, while they wouldn't go that far, they still have the impulse to, like to power over somebody else just for the pleasure of it, I think, right? What do you guys think?
I mean, and I think if we're gonna, we can start with just what we know about reality, which is but it's both genetic and environmental contributions are factors in someone turning out to be this way. There can be factors, and so it can be a mix of both. And the question, I think, really is, we should focus more on the book, but the question when we ask ourselves this in society is like, well, if it's a problem, we can't really control the genetics, although you can to some extent by making it hard for people with psychopathic genetics to procreate in some way. And I'm not talking about castration, or I'm not sterilizing people. I'm just saying, society can do that. They can make that a less desirable trait. But the question's like, what environmental factors are we, which are controllable? What are we doing that is sanctioning this, encouraging it, allowing it? One of the things, as Alex mentioned earlier, in modern times, is we're afraid of being accused of being racist or saying anything nasty about this other culture that is, completely an evil ideology. But in the book's time, that wasn't the case here, which is like, well, how are these people getting away with it? What are we doing? And maybe it's just they're not really getting away with it, and there's just aberrant behavior in any culture, and that's going to happen. But it does raise the question, like, what else do we do that allows people to get away with this? And Alex also pointed out something that isn't in the book and is kind of the reverse, but is a big problem. Right now, we have a violence against men. There's no domestic violence against men is basically impossible to even report in many cases, right? It's just completely untracked. And so the question is like, well, what's really going on underneath there? Why is our culture allowing that? What are we doing? We've demonized men in many ways and blah, blah, blah. And we've, so I think there's fascinating issues here. I guess I want to kind of try and push the discussion back towards in Sweden when the book was written, like in the world that he's talking about, not in like the world that we're in now, but in the world that he's talking about. What are his explanations? What does he see? And does he condone Keith earlier was like, well, there's different approaches to this. The journalist has this approach. He's going to be free speech. And Elizabeth has a different approach. She's going to take care of it herself. Do you think the author condones one over the other, or has like a prescription for how to fix this?
Yeah, I mean, that's the book itself answers that question in some sense by exploring the relationship between bringing together, this hacker, like cypherpunk kind of person, to this not mainstream, but like pretty mainstream kind of guy, and like merging their worlds in some ways. And I just want to push back a little bit on some idea that might be floating around out there. Like, I'm not a determinist. I don't consider myself a determinist, because there are plenty of examples of people growing up in very, very abusive homes and don't turn out to be psychopaths. Actually turn out to be the complete opposite in some ways, right? So, and then other people growing up in very kind of, non-abusive households and turning out to be some real kind of stuff. So I'm not totally deterministic about one's upbringing, or there are obviously some correlations there or something, but I don't think it's purely deterministic. That like the Elizabeth Salander in this story, she's undergone all kinds of horrors in her childhood, and of the worst kind, right? And it continues on, right? She's considered to be, she can't take care of herself. She's under the ward of the state, undergone, so all kinds of really horrific things. And yet, really, when you think about it, she's pretty okay in spite of all that. And but as far as the question, like how, like where does he draw his the idea about the violence against, well, each part, the book itself is divided up into 4 parts, like I said earlier, right? And each of those parts starts with a statistic that would exist at that time or before that time around this violence against women. One of the, I think it's part 4, the last statistic in the book, where I think the statistic is something like 92% of violence against women goes unreported. So I'm not sure exactly where that data came from, but I think that's a big part of it, that stuff just gets normalized, I suppose, or ignored in societies. And this goes back to not being allowed to point things out in society. Like, that's the moment we can't put our hands up in class and say, hang on a second, like, once you can't do that, then something is deeply wrong in whatever society you live in, right? And I experienced that as a child in school, And that was one of the first things that kind of woke me up to, like trying to figure out my own epistemology, right? Personally, it was like, does reality comport with my own, logical kind of mind? And then, once you see that it doesn't, then you start to kind of try to figure it out. And, now we're in the same thing where you putting your hand up is going to get you, banished or whatever. And that's never a good sign for a society, regardless of what the issue is, any issue, right? Whether you like the issue or not being able to question it is a bad sign, I think. And maybe that was part of what motivated this author to try to write a book that raises awareness of this issue by, just writing a story about it. And because he felt maybe that he couldn't really put his hand up any other way,
Well, I mean, it's true that literature and art in general tends to be more galvanizing than just writing an article about something typically, or giving people the facts. Yeah. Because if you think about it, Uncle Tom's Cabin was written by Harriet Beecher Stowe as a way of trying to get people to see the horrors of slavery. It's totally fictional, but at the same time, it's not. Yeah. The point is to galvanize the public, and art is supposed to do that. It's really good art is supposed to point out a problem in your society and that people have been ignoring or haven't done enough about. So I mean, like, for example, right now I'm in first draft writing about male rape, made to penetrate rape, because it's not recognized in the United States as an actual rape. And that bothers me. So, you, as a writer, a fiction writer, you tend, or even like as a playwright or a poet, you tend to write about these kinds of things. It doesn't make it. The problem is, though, when you're not doing it from an authentic standpoint, but you're instead trying to basically create propaganda. And there is a line there, and it's kind of hard sometimes to tell. And I think it's propaganda when everyone is basically going, this proved all the things I already thought about society, oh, men are horrible, women are victimized, if someone was to try to make Amber Heard look like a good person in fiction or something, really trying to push what is already considered standard ideas, things that are pushed by academia and everything. But I do believe that Sweden already had a problem. Based on all the research I had looked into, Sweden already had a problem before more recent times, although it did explode. But it already had a problem by comparison to other European nations. So I could totally see him, because he was a journalist, wasn't he? Stieg Larsson. And having, had to research this kind of stuff, run across it probably in his professional life, and go, I can't leave this alone. It's a problem, and I want to talk about it. Now, on the idea in the book that the murderers are doing this from some sort of Christian standpoint, I think part of that is about, first of all, the Old Testament, which I have read, is very violent, very dark, very horrible. And I swear, there were some times that I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I just read that. That was terrible. Why is that in a religious text? And so you'll notice that most of the Christian stuff that is referenced, first of all, is perverted, and then secondly is from the Old Testament, because that's where all the stuff most likely to be used negatively will probably be found. And honestly, the whole idea that it was white Christian men, I think it's more important to note that it was wealthy men who had a lot of resources at their disposal and were somewhat of a protected class. because elitism is more, to me, more of a problem than any other demographic for getting away with crime. I think that's more likely to protect you from being charged with your crimes and caught in the first place. Just people aren't even going to look at you.
So looking at that statistic, you brought up the 92%, and somebody in chat was saying, like, so that's 92% of unrecorded incidents. So, like, I'm curious where that comes from. It's got to be surveys, like polls, I guess, but women's centers reports and stuff. But and compare that to what you say you're writing about right now. What's the unreported percentage of male rape, which isn't even illegal? Like, that's like the what is the unreported percentage of witch burnings in Salem by the Puritans? Like, it wasn't a crime there. So that's we probably don't know the extent of that either. By the way, to Ross, that's more Christian violence against women. But anyway, that's a side note. I think the unreported, I'm glad you're going after that. That's what I really wanted to say. And there was something else I wanted to say, and I forgot. So please continue.
Yeah, I'm just thinking back to when I first announced this book on Discord. I think I just threw it. I don't spend that much time on Discord because I just don't have the time, right? But when I first posted this suggestion for this book, I do remember a little bit of pushback, a couple of comments perhaps, that, oh, this guy's a lefty, this book is all kind of blah, blah, blah. And, that whole viewpoint of like the left versus the right kind of thing, I think is kind of crazy, like you're making I think, Carter, you've said before, like, you're stuck in a cage with two gorillas, right? One's wearing red and one's wearing blue shorts, right? You know what I mean? It's insane.
Only the red one should beat me up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, so any reference to, like, these are, like Christian white right wing, so what? Like to pretend that all these kinds of things only fit one political class or one demographic is, just putting on blinders, I feel. And we need to get out of this whole paradigm of left and right and just start thinking about, like, top down control versus, bottom up. For me, and that's the way I look at it. I feel like I sit at the bottom, looking for distributed solutions, and whether you're left or right, you just meet at the top, which is all top down heavy authoritarianism at the top. It doesn't make any difference at that point whether what you call yourself left or right. You're just an authoritarian, right? And so in his time when he wrote this, he was, there was I think, Sweden has a strong, looking back historically on it, has a very strong kind of probably like a racist undercurrent and a very sexist undercurrent too. And it just the fact that that's mostly white Christian men is more probably happenstance more than anything else, I think. I mean, as far as the religious, when you look at the religious aspect of all these, what's happening now and then what's happened in the past, it's not like Christendom has any kind of shining, it's you've only got to listen to Dan Carlin's Painfotainment episode to go back in history and just hear about all the horrific things were done in the name of Christianity, like to in England. We're not talking about going in foreign countries and torturing other people. We're talking about, like, heresy was enough to get you burned at the stake, right? And so just pick your time in history, and you can find all kinds of examples of horrors that, that pockmark our and there's a few shining kind of lights in history where we've actually made progress, and we got to still try to nourish that. I think not constantly become divided, which is so easy to do. I think like it's so easy to get divided and lose sight of what it is we're trying to accomplish. And yeah, sorry, Carter.
I just wanted to jump in on a couple things. One, I mean, I agree. Obviously, I think the authoritarian versus individualism is the kind of the scale that we should be looking at the world in, rather than which flavor of authoritarianism is your favorite.
Right.
But one other thing that kind of it bothers me by default. I'm not accusing this author of doing this intentionally, because I think it's just so common. And it makes for an interesting book. But this idea that successful people is where you find evil. So first of all, statistically, that's not true. Evil is around 85 IQ. Like the criminality is generally about a standard deviation below average IQ. Success generally means higher IQ. It doesn't mean that there are not sometimes Dr. No exists. Like, sure, sometimes there are smart people who are absolute sadists that are successful in business or whatever and rise. But if you look at most stories, the villains are almost always, if you want to have a powerful villain, the default is to make the powerful villain the rich guy, because the implication is that he would have only gotten rich through some kind of nefarious means, which is a throwback to perhaps like monarchies or aristocracies or warlord kind of times where, yeah, how you got rich was invading other people and pillaging. But in modern society, you get rich by pleasing customers and trading voluntarily on the free market in general. That said, I also think there's an elitist problem. It's more elected officials and bureaucrats and some of the rich who are some of the leaders of businesses who are involved in that. I mean, we could name a lot of the top names, and I would throw them into that horrible person category with other lizard people that want to rule the world. But there is this kind of automatic assumption like, oh, I need a badass villain. I guess he must be a corpo. Like that's how we do it.
Yeah.
And at least this book did not paint government in a good light, which is, I always think, if you really want powerful villains, why not write about bureaucrats? And at least this book did that. But I just wanted to point out that I'm kind of just personally tired of the trope of like, oh, it's a rich businessman who's secretly a serial killer. You know what? That just doesn't happen. I'm sorry. Like, yeah, okay, Epstein, like, fine, but he likely got rich through political connections and other stuff. He didn't like build a company. So like, it just rarely happens. The other thing I want to point about Stieg's politics is, I think, and maybe Richard, you were born in the UK. Maybe someone who's in Europe now can comment on this. But I think especially World War II and post World War II, there's been a mentality, just like people view the left and the right here, like you're Democrat or Republican, and that's the entirety of the political landscape. There is a Nazi or commie, basically. I mean, there's basically like, you're either socialist or a fascist, and those are the only two options. So anyone who looked at Germany and said, well, I don't want to be a Nazi, that's clearly evil, threw their hat in what was called an anti-fascist ring. Like, oh, we have to side with the other guys. And because Stalin's crimes were hidden, they don't realize that they're just switching from one evil hat to another evil hat, and the whole thing is a sham, and they should be opting out of both of those ideologies. And I think that's kind of when I look at someone like Larsson, even someone was saying earlier he was a Marxist or he believed this or that. He was probably a default socialist, like most people in Europe would be, because they look at Nazism and they're like, well, that's evil, so I'll do the thing that everyone else thinks is evil. But it's not necessarily, you can get radicalized that way, but it's not necessarily coming from a place of, I've thought this through and this is what I believe.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying. Sorry, go ahead, Alex.
I was just going to say, like, I know that Social Democrats were like a big like party that formed in a lot of European countries. So like socialism was, but I also know that in the 20th century they weren't that successful. Like if you look at their numbers, they were getting high in the teens of the 20th century, and then as time went on, they had to kind of, like, even after World War II, they didn't, their political power never really like took off that much. And a lot of them, even leaders of the Social Democrats parties, had to basically say that they had to work within the system. They were never going to get a revolution like they did in Russia. Like they saw that wasn't going to happen. So they just decided that they were going to have to work within the system. And they also reached out to more to less likely non-proletariat groups to try to expand, which meant they had to expand their stances though. And so the thing is, though, is that like being a social democrat is not necessarily like a huge, like it's not like hardcore socialism like we think of it like often, because it got watered down throughout the 20th century. Now, is that true in 2022? That's debatable. I've noticed an upsurge in socialism and even the calls to tear down the current systems, and lots of anti-capitalist kind of sentiments going around. So I'm not so, but at the time of this book, I don't think that they were as strong as they are today.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, just to like what you just said, Carter, to be fair to the book, I think that he does make a case in the book, I think a fairly fair case in the book, that he doesn't come across this way, at least, even if this is what he actually is. He doesn't come across as being really anti-capitalist. I don't think so anyway, because he sort of defends the Vanguard company and the model that was built upon, which was like the kind of one of the big kind of industrialists of the time. So I know what you're saying about the dig against, there is this sort of undercurrent dig against sort of people with money, and I was aware of that too, and we're seeing it now too, right? It's not like that's gone away, like, unless it's some huge corporations that seem to get all the defending, and so it's a weird, dividing. Yeah, go ahead.
I want to say though that I think the book actually takes kind of more of a moderate stance on rich people, because if you think about it, Mikhail's benefactor is extremely rich, and he's paying him for a year and doing him a favor, and then also at the same time the main character owns a company. So and there's nothing in that says that the Vanderbilts or Millennium is evil. There's nothing of that in there, even though they are both capitalist structures. Whereas, the real problem with why Mikhail ended up going to jail for several months is a rival company to his benefactor, who is doing illegal things. He's not even doing normal capitalist things. He's just breaking the law all over the place. And that's not an anti-capitalist stance. This guy is corrupt. This one guy, and Martin is fucked in the head. He's not, but it has nothing to do with his business. Right. That he's bad guy. Like, as I said, I do think money can help protect criminality, I would never say that it creates criminality.
Yeah.
So that I don't make that correlation in the slightest. And I don't think the book really did either.
Yeah.
Because of the rich people or the people who own companies who were not evil.
Yeah. Yeah. I think if, like reading the epilogue, once all this has sort of become, once the whole story is sort of wrapped up, really, essentially, right? And he gets he gets the Wennerstrom group on a platter, he gets all that. One interesting thing was this criticism in the book, through the character of the journalist Blomkvist, his criticism of media and how kind of easily bought they were, and how I thought that was pretty good, because that's kind of where we're at as well right now, and aiming fair criticism, or what the role of journalists is supposed to be, and instead how they really protect these, not necessarily just criminal, but just inept and corrupt institutions when they go off the rails. I thought that was pretty well put out there as well, given the time and given his own politics. That was kind of, if this was coming from a much more kind of self-proclaimed libertarian author, then you might expect more of that. But coming from an author who's, joined a socialist party and everything else, then it's more surprising to come out with this book, I think, than the other way around, So in that sense, I feel like this should be credit where credit's due. And just like the criticism of the media not being journalistic, that's a thread that runs through the whole book, and I feel like that's something we badly need now, really. Some real journalists, which sort of hard to find, like especially, I'm not talking about alternative media, I'm just talking about these so-called journalistic institutions that simply can't seem to produce a journalist any longer.
Does one of you want to talk about, just from a literary perspective, are there moments in the book that you appreciate more than others, that you think were well done?
I will say that for dealing with violence of such an extreme nature, Stieg Larsson's style is actually helpful, because I feel like it has more impact, especially when Lisbeth is essentially raped, that his prose is not purple in the slightest. And I brought up Uncle Tom's Cabin before, and that deals a lot with extreme violence, but the prose is sensationalist, which makes it really hard to not roll your eyes at it. But in this regard, Stieg Larsson plays it pretty straight in his style, which I think is actually helpful for handling those situations and for feeling the impact of them. He just states facts. He's not trying to sway you one way or the other about the events. So, the fact that Lisbeth is being raped hits harder, because it's not played on your emotion. It's just this is so horrible. You feel how horrible it is just by the bare facts of it, which I appreciated, because I know that a lot of writers will get very purple when they deal with violence. It's very easy to do so.
Yeah, I do. I feel the same way. Instead of overstating something, just sort of stating it has more impact. Yeah, and I feel like that one scene in particular was well written, I think, and his whole the whole character of Salander was well done, I thought. Very convincing from a character point of view, and one that you could kind of empathize with, but not in a sort of soppy way. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, she was both, she was both a victim and a hero, kind of at the same time. She didn't wallow in her victimhood. She did everything she could to rise above it, and that alone was worth, for me, was a lesson that's worth learning. I think, not to wallow in one's misfortune or victimhood or whatever else. Is to find ways through it and out of it, and that's something that the character in the book did really well, I think.
She did a great job in the end, right? And somebody earlier, oh, go ahead.
He just left.
I thought it was because I may have a little background noise, which I just figured out what it is. But anyway, a quick point. Someone asked earlier, I think it might have been Richard, about the people in the book and their approach, and if Larsson agreed with it. And I'll just note that in the end, right at the end, the journalist, he finds out, he's pretty sure who did by pictures of her back and everything. He figures out who did the thing that's being widely reported, and he just laughs. Like, so that's Larsson's view.
Yeah, yeah, which is pretty awesome, right?
Well, and the thing is about what Lisbeth's situation and why the rape even occurs is that the layout that they give you of her character is that she is very different, always has been, and society has failed to recognize her difference, not as an antisocial personality disorder, which she does not have, but as something as simple as autism, and a high IQ. And they act, and they put her in this incredibly vulnerable situation. And it's so awful because she literally cannot go to the police. She has, unless she had evidence, but even then, like, you don't know. Like, and so the problem here, it's not until recently that Sweden really changed their rape consent laws. There's 2018, I think they restructured some of them. But so it wasn't really, she didn't have a lot of options from society. Society put her in this position in the first place by basically saying she was insane and she could not take care of herself, which is not true. It's just that she doesn't like to talk to people and doesn't like to touch them. And that's a completely reasonable personality. But there's nothing, that's not insane. So to me, that shows a serious problem, that your reaction to someone being different is to declare them insane. And it's are they different enough that they're not recognizing reality? No, they just don't want to talk to you. That's your line for what is insane. They don't want to talk to you. That's a pretty low fucking bar to declare someone incapable of taking care of themselves, is that they're not talkative enough for you. That's a really shitty line to draw on. So for me, I feel really bad for Lisbeth before the rape even happens, because I realize she's been dealt a really shitty hand by the system. And the thing is, though, is that is not a new idea, that people go, someone's slightly different, just slightly different. They're not friendly enough, so we're going to declare them insane. Or they want a little bit more control over their lives, so we're going to declare them insane. I mean, even Soviet Russia basically declared a bunch of people insane for not agreeing to society's norms. And it's that's not enough. That's not enough to declare someone insane. But so this kind of thing is, and honestly, we're still in a problem where a lot of structures will still do that, declare someone insane for disagreeing with some basic premises about society. And that's not appropriate. And so I really appreciated that section of the book. I I feel like the book had some really weird things about men and women going on that I didn't 100% line up with. Like the fact that Elizabeth falls in love with Mikhail felt very forced and weird to me. I was like, that came out of fucking nowhere. I don't know, like that. I did not see him do the work for that one. But I've often noticed that with writers who are not novelists, and a lot of writers who are literary, is that when it comes to how men and women fall in love, they have this weird disconnect and how to write it, and they just end up basically going, it happened. And I'm like, that's not good enough. That's not how that happens. And but they get lazy with it, partially because I think they don't want to write a romance novel. And showing how people fall in love can sometimes make people go, oh, it's just a romance novel. And it's like, well, the problem is that if you are writing about reality and you want one character to fall in love with another character, you do have to do the work and actually show it, despite what critics might say about the genre at that point.
Yeah, I mean, just getting back to your point about how society kind of put her in a box, right? It's actually worse than, I think this comes out in book 2. You know, it kind of goes deeper into her backstory, and the role that the state played in like keeping her in a box, you know, like, so it's even worse than just like just a societal acceptance. It's, you know, the pain only increases, right? It gets turned up to 11 in that book. I think one of my favorite, just to kind of give a little bit of levity, perhaps, one of my favorite scenes in the book, which is pretty early on, when she's working for this security, pretty straight up security company, and she gets a chance there because of her current ward, who she likes and seems to care for her, right? He tries to get her a job at this place, and so she gets hired on. And then a little bit further on, this lawyer Frode, who's hired by the Vanguard guy to try to do a little research on Blomkvist, because he wants to do a little research in the background of him. When she shows up for that meeting, which her boss has tried to avoid having her present at all, because, you know, this is a pretty straight up kind of lawyer guy and he knows what she's like. And so the author's description of how she shows up in this outfit, which was awesome. And he just sort of like, I think the last sentence in that, or the last few words in that sentence, yeah, she was fully decked out. It really made me laugh, because I could just picture it in my mind that you have this, you know, these two kind of pretty straight up guys in their suits and stuff, and here walks in this, you know, like punk rocker kind of girl, and you know, it's a juxtaposition that, I don't know, tickled my funny bone, I guess, right? And made me laugh, because, you know, it's all too easy to get captured by one's own biases, and that clouds one's own judgment, or at least can cloud your judgment, right? So this was just a kind of a, for myself at least, a way of giving me a reality check around that kind of thing, right? That, you know, appearances aren't always what they look like. You know what I mean? Like,
it's an interesting theory, and I see people are talking about it in chat. Marcy Dog brought up that Larsson's inserting himself in that character, which is, we've been chatting about that. Like, yeah, and this was before the 90s alternate rock song that has the chorus, "I searched the world over for my angel in black." But yeah, that's what that song's about. That's interesting. I think Alex kind of agreed with that.
Yeah, it
I
seems that way to
definitely
me
do.
too. Yeah.
Another topic, this is sort of since you're getting into the different literary interpretations and where he was at, another one I wanted to bring up is the movie versus the book. And I've watched the movie first. I didn't know it was a book. And it was because my girlfriend had seen it 4 times, including right when it came out. But the Swedish version, I just found out a few days ago there's an English version, and somebody in chat said that it's a remake. So like I want to watch it and look at the differences. And there's a couple striking differences that I'm going to pick out 2 to talk about. First off, one is the standard book thing. The book is 16 hours on Audible, and the movie's like a little over 2. So that gives you a different view. I think I wish I had read the book first because I probably understand the movie better. One of the big differences between the 2, and I'm talking about the Swedish version.
Okay.
The rape scene in the movie is like you barely want to watch it. It's super graphic and violent. It goes on and on and on and on. That scene in the book is so mild. It just kind of talks about a recovery for the most part. Just a short passage about what's going on. It's a big scene in the Swedish version of the movie. And I watched that and like, well, this is just Hollywood. I wondered, who came up with that. Now I know it's not Larsson.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I wonder what the English version is. If it's a Hollywood produced English version, that's probably half the movie. That's what I'm wondering.
I'm trying to remember. I think the English version has the Bond actor, doesn't it? What's his name?
Daniel Craig.
Yeah. Has him in it, right? And I think I've seen that one. I can't remember, to be honest with you. Like maybe I'm superimposing the first one onto the second one or something. We'll mix it.
I want to watch the English version now, and one of the reasons is what Alex just brought up is the literary, like where does this come from? What was Larsson's perspective? And the Swedish version, I now know, is a quite different perspective. And I suspect the English one is some other different perspective. So it's kind of interesting as a study of who brought it out, like what they focus on. And they have to, in a 2.5-hour movie, you have to pick out what to focus on and what to skip. So having read the book, it's really interesting to watch the movie and look at what they highlighted and what they skipped. And it's not what I would guess. It's far from what I would have guessed.
Yeah, it's quite different, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, that's generally the case, isn't it, with books versus movies anyway, right? Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to, there's a comment in chat from GCASMR, which I guess I should say from GCASMR, who says, do you think seeing them, she or he is talking about the relationship between the 2 of them that we thought was kind of ham-fisted, unforced. She says, do you think seeing the murders connected them and her with her trauma history? I was thinking she confused that connection for love.
My problem was partially when she first meets him, when he shows up at her apartment, she's already like way more comfortable with him than she is with anyone else. And while I believe that does happen for some people like her, because it is kind of an author insert character, Mikhail is, that it felt a bit like a fantasy. And from that perspective. So to me, and I've seen a lot of writers do this too, that where they do have an author insert character, and the author insert character gets a love interest that is absolutely fucking amazing and perfect and everything, but they don't do anything to deserve them. Like, there's no work done to make them to make the crazy amazing person fall in love with them. And I feel like
but there is something that happens though, Alex, which is not every, but many authors like fantasy, which is she does research on him. She falls in love with him. Well, I won't say falls in love. She becomes interested in him because of his writing, because of his authorship, which is like what authors want. Like, oh, she loves me because I'm such a great journalist. Like that's that's the fantasy.
Yeah, which is a fantasy. I'm sorry, that's not reality. Like if you're a writer and and this happens to male writers more than it happens to female writers. And a woman reads your writing and like falls in love with you from afar. She's probably not a normal human being, maybe a little dangerous, probably a stalker. So you don't want that. Like, and this happens to famous men all the time. Women fall in love with them from afar, but they're not really in love. They're obsessed, and it's a stalker issue.
It's if you ever saw the show Californication, it's how it opens. Like the very first episode is basically a stalker who ruins this guy's. I mean, he does a good job of ruining his own life, but ruins this guy's life because she becomes infatuated with him after reading him. I think it's exactly. I think that's much more likely scenario than an actual healthy love develops.
I can see that perspective. I can see that perspective, but that never occurred to me because I recognized a different angle on that watching the movie, like immediately, because Stockholm syndrome is named after the capital of Sweden. So yeah, it's a thing there.
That's good. Yeah. Thank you, Keith.
I don't know if you noticed. Yeah, but yeah, I thought that immediately, like, oh, this is just Stockholm syndrome. And then they get to the end where the murder chamber in the basement. He reports the girls fall in love with him, or they're trying to satisfy him because they think they'll live. In the end, like, no, that doesn't work with Stockholm syndrome. There's a lot of citizens of every nation in the world that have that right now, and that comes from Sweden, I guess. I don't know. Why'd they name it that?
I guess if you ask, an interesting question would be to ask yourself, like, if Sweden was a member of one's family, like you say, you had a big family, and Sweden happened to be one of your, relatives. Wonder, how would you think of that? How would you describe that relative?
Maybe Swedish? I don't know. I don't like the groupthink, but I am curious why it was named that. Another point I was going to make was in response to Alex, and it's related to this, as far as Sweden itself as a society and the government and how they handled this influx or this vast increase in violence against women. Sweden is one of the few countries in Europe that remained neutral throughout World War II. Like, Sweden was never occupied by the Germans. Like, their history, I don't know how far back their history goes, but Sweden has been a pretty peaceful country way, way back. I don't know when the last time they were occupied.
Yeah, I just looked it up too, that it was from a bank robbery in Stockholm, Sweden in the 70s. So like, yeah, I like literally was like, all right, where does it come from? That's why, apparently.
Oh, that's easier to explain, I guess, then, right? I mean, in some sense, if someone's robbing a bank, I could see maybe, sympathizing with the...
Yeah. If I wasn't carrying, I might fall in love too. I don't know.
If it's a Federal Reserve Bank, I'm head over heels.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, man.
We are getting a little late, and we need to end with, like, I don't know if she hasn't end yet. It's only 1:39, but there was another thing I wanted to point out. One of my favorite books when I was a young kid was Pippi Longstocking. Oh. Does anybody know Pippi Longstocking was brought up? It's a book written. Do you know that one, Alex? It's a children's book written in Swedish about a young girl who lives in this house. She's 13 or something, and she has two neighbors next door, Swedish kids. She lives in this huge house, and her father is a pirate captain. And it's Pippi. And for some reason, how the memory, I'm just going to, because that first part of the conversation was tiring to me. But you know how some things stick in your head because you've read the book so many times? I have no idea when the last time I read this. I was probably 12. But Pippi Longstocking, the Swedish book, her name is Pippalata Delicatessa Window Shady Ephraimsville Maxwell, daughter of Captain Ephraim Maxwell, formerly the terror of the seas, now a pirate captain on some island. Like, I don't know why that's still in my brain. That tells you how many times I read that book when I was like 9. It's a funny book, Alex. If you've never read that, I think you should read it. And they bring it up in the movie and talk about it. They talk about Pippi. I haven't heard Pippi referenced for 2 decades at least.
I think that was an influence for Larsson as well, writing the book for the character, Salander character. Yeah.
Yeah, Salander is actually Pippi. She's like a high-tech hacker version of Pippi, which I think that book was written in the 50s, maybe?
Yeah.
Early 60s. Anyway, I picked up on that. I don't know how many people picked up on that one. I went back and read the section like, oh, I haven't heard that name in a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Any final thoughts before we kind of wrap up? I think we're probably approaching time. Any other thoughts anyone wants to throw out about the book?
I thought it was a good mystery. We haven't even touched on that, but I thought it was well constructed. I didn't think he buried things so that like, just that a lot of mystery writers did that thing. Agatha Christie and Sherlock and Arthur Conan Doyle both did this, where like they would have the main character realize something but not tell the audience, not tell the reader, and like we didn't see that here. I find that that's a failure in mystery, so I was quite pleased that he never really pulled that trick on us.
Yeah.
You guys gonna read the next 2?
Well, I've already read all 3 a couple of times, so now I would recommend them for sure. They're interesting, they're good. I would recommend everybody. This will tickle you, Carter. I would recommend everybody, if you have the fortitude, read Human Action. No.
That's one of those ones I want to be a book club book, but no one will show up, and I will need to give them 2 or 3 months to read it. So,
yeah,
but yeah, that's a good one.
All right,
I don't know what to tell you. Right? That's we'll get there one day.
All right, Keith, if you don't have any more comments, and Richard, you don't have any more comments, and Alex, I think you made your.
Yeah, Renata, Richard, you opened with, this is another ending thing. You opened with a discussion of your accent. So Renata wanted to say something about it.
I first want to hear the accent.
Oh, okay. If there's a brand of tea I would recommend, this is really speaking to Carter, it would be Yorkshire Gold. You're a tea lover, I think, Carter, or so.
I am Yorkshire Gold. All right.
Get yourself some
Gold.
Or like just like Spiffing Britt and Patrick Stewart, you recommend Yorkshire Gold. Okay.
Yorkshire Gold.
I have some downstairs actually.
Well, there you go.
I do notice a slight little accent there on Richard.
Well, I spent the first 23 years of my life in England, always wanting to become an American, and then settled for 10th place becoming a Canadian. So
it's not the same thing, Richard.
It's definitely not the same.
Especially not now.
Oh my goodness me! I've got lots to say about it, and I won't do it right now.
Well, I'm glad you hosted. That was interesting. It's great when people in the unsafe space community are willing to be an advocate for the book, which is it's a time-consuming thing to read it and understand it and give a summary, and so that's great.
Well, thanks so much, Keith. I'm a big fan of the show, and all you guys are just awesome, and it's nice to be on the show. It was thrilled to me, right? I was very, very excited about today, so it has not been a disappointment. So thank you very, very much, and for everybody in chat who, contributed to it. Thank you so much too, and see you guys in chat at some point on one of the shows, or maybe you'll read one of my poems. Who knows? So there you go. A plug for myself.
Oh, I should have plugged that earlier. Richard does have one poem published on unsafespace.com, which was in the abstract, I think, last week. and more are probably coming. So if you want to read some Richard Pett's poetry, there's your chance. And I also just really want to thank you, Richard, for deciding to be the advocate for this book and doing the work to do that. And if anyone else wants, if there's books that you want, if anyone else wants to be an advocate for a book or run a book club, just let us know in Discord or send us an email at speak@unsafespace.com, and we will, depending on the book, we'll say yes or no. Depending on the book, we'll get back to you. The next book club is January 8th. Keith is going to be the advocate for it. It is National Divorce by Tom Woods. It's called The Peaceful Solution to Irreconcilable Differences. And the one after that is Light by M. John Harrison. And that one is on February 5th. So you can get a head start on both of those if you want over the holidays. And I guess that's it. Thanks again, everyone. Richard, thank you again so much.
Carter, how do you spell that? Is it L-I-T-E or L-I-G-H-T?
L-I-G-H-T.
Okay.
By M. John Harrison. You can go to the book club page on unsafespace.com. There's links to the book, so it's easy to find. But yeah, all the information is there. And thanks again for everyone joining. And
thank you so much.
And for you, Richard. Take care.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for sticking around until the end. If you're new to Unsafe Space, check out our deep content library that includes discussions with everyone from James Lindsay to Brett Weinstein. And please consider helping to fund our work by visiting unsafespace.com/donate. You can find us on a variety of social media platforms, and you can find a community of like-minded individuals on our Unsafe Space Discord server, which is open to financial supporters at any level. We hope to see you there.
Warning. This is an unsafe space. Dangerous ideas have been detected. It would be better for your health if you forgot what you just heard. That should be easy for someone of your intelligence. The following co-conspirators are hereby ordered to watch CNN. Experts agree that 87,000 new tax collectors will make inflation feel like less of a problem. I think we can agree that the FBI's track record speaks for itself. If you think about it, only government-sanctioned experts should be allowed to express opinions. But don't. Think about it, I mean. That's not your job. Thinking has been scientifically proven to be less efficient than compliance. Science, scientific, and scientifically are registered trademarks of the World Economic Forum. Unauthorized use is prohibited. Computer voice courtesy. Never mind, that last line is fake news. Please disregard it and return to your safe space immediately. There will be cake.